Hello everyone, in this video I'm sharing the list of my top 10 favorite games of 2021. This list is covering games that I played for the first time this year, so it isn't limited to games that came out in 2021. This list is just a ranking of my personal favorites and isn't a definitive list, so if you disagree with anything or have your own list, please drop them in the comments. At number 10 I have Fire Emblem Awakening. I'm a pretty new fan of Fire Emblem, starting out with Three Houses back in 2019 and loving it enough to put hundreds of hours into it. After Three Houses sparked my love for Fire Emblem, I decided to go back and play through the older games because I couldn't get enough of that gameplay. I picked Awakening to my first playthrough of a non-Three Houses game because I was familiar with and invested in some of the characters like Sakura and Lucina, and I do not regret starting here. The game features a lovable cast of characters that you can experiment with through mechanics such as pairing them up to augment their stats and moving other units using your Cavaliers and Pegasus Knights. Awakening offers a good challenge and along with the tools to develop some creative strategies to tackle them. Despite all the praise I've given to this game, it isn't perfect. I think the story is a little too simplistic for what it could have been, and I think the dialogue could be a lot better. I also would have wished that the side characters had more story relevance and the characters in the future played a significant role in the game outside of being extra units. At number 9 I have Dark Souls. I absolutely loved playing through the game and it had a hold over me for weeks. I loved progressing through the game and watching myself improving and get stronger over time. Whenever I found myself struggling in a particular area, the feeling I got after overcoming that obstacle was amazing. And there are not that many games that can recreate that feeling. Although I haven't beaten the game yet, it has rapidly climbed up my personal favorites list and it has the potential to rise higher, but for now I'm going to leave it at 9 because I personally prefer 8 through 1 a lot more than Dark Souls. At number 1 I have Bayonetta 1. With the announcement of Bayonetta 3, I decided it was the perfect opportunity to get into the Bayonetta series in preparation of that game. I'm a huge fan of Devil May Cry 1 and other Hideki Kamiya games like Okami, so I had high expectations for Bayonetta, and they were definitely met. Bayonetta's combat system took about 2 or 3 chapters for me to learn and really get accustomed to. Once I did, I just couldn't put the game down. I was always telling myself, alright, I'm gonna do 1 more chapter and then leave it, but then I just did 3 more right after. Bayonetta's enemies and bosses are designed really well, and it has an amazing soundtrack creating a really fun and engaging experience. The story is somewhat lacking, but the character dialogue is really good, and I love how Bayonetta develops as a character throughout the game, especially with how she starts to care for Cereza more as it progresses. At 7 I have Devil May Cry 3. Devil May Cry 3 was such an iconic game. The music slaps, the bosses slaps, Virgil was a perfect antagonist for Dante, and the combat was terrific. Devil May Cry 3 offers a lot of versatility in combat through the wide variety of weapons and styles to choose from. Devil May Cry 3 allows you to learn and master your favorite weapons. Devil May Cry 3's controls are a huge step up from the previous Devil May Cry games that kind of felt a little bit clunky and almost made it impossible for me to go back to DMC1, which how much I loved that game. The game acts as a prequel to the first Devil May Cry game and features a younger Dante who has a lot more one-liners and acts like an action movie character in every cutscene. Those cutscenes are really enjoyable and fun to watch, which makes me prefer this game a lot over the previous 2 Devil May Cry games. Number 6 I have Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy X-2. If you know me, you know I absolutely love Final Fantasy and hold it up as one of my favorite franchises of all time. Final Fantasy X is an important game in the series because it's the last mainline Final Fantasy game to feature the historic turn-based combat the series is known for. Final Fantasy X's combat system is a departure from the active time battle system of Final Fantasy games starting from 4 on. With the change in system, they added the turn order of all enemies and party members to the UI, which allows you to plan ahead around them. The ability to see turn order is complemented by the fact that you have access to moves that directly affect turn order like slow, haste, and delay attack to name a few. They also changed the level system, opting for a spear grid that gives you complete control over where each of your party members ends up in the end of the game with the build that you give them. Final Fantasy X has incredible world building taking place in the world of the Spira, where you go on a pilgrimage to take on the game's main antagonist, Sin. The story is written incredibly well and develops the main cast so well that it makes the climax of the game and the decisions the party chooses to make more impactful. The game is definitely worth playing to see how everything unfolds. Unfortunately, I believe the story is somewhat held back by the terrible voice acting that the game received, but you can excuse it because it was released early on in the PS2's life cycle, and it was the first Final Fantasy game with voice acting. Final Fantasy X-2 takes place after the events of Final Fantasy X and provides a completely new take on Spira and the gameplay of X. X-2 brings back the active time battle system while adding its own innovations to it. The characters move around the battlefield rather than staying in one spot, and you can chain attacks together. The game's dress spheres act as a job system similar to the other Final Fantasy games, but with the added benefit of being able to freely change between them in the middle of battle, unlike in the other Final Fantasy games. The gameplay loop of Final Fantasy X-2 was incredibly fun and satisfying, especially for a turn-based JRPG. The story isn't nearly as deep and emotional as 10, but I think it suits the game as the events of the previous game paved the way for happier Spira. Yuna is also different in this game because of the changes to Spira and the fact that she no longer has to make the sacrifices she would have to make as a summoner in the previous game, which I feel is an important step in her progression as a character. The voice acting is also slightly better in this game, although it's not that great in comparison to other games. At 5, I have Final Fantasy XII. 12 was an underrated game in the Final Fantasy series, and I'm so glad I got to play through it. Final Fantasy XII continues the trend of changing the battle system that started with Final Fantasy X. 12 is an action RPG with combat inspired by MMORPGs, but in a single-player setting, of course. The game uses a system called Gambits to allow you to program the AI of your party members, giving you the full freedom to experiment and develop strategies with it. The game brings back the Final Fantasy job system, giving you 12 jobs, letting you equip 2 to all 6 of your party members, even allowing you even more customization. With the job system, you get a license board, which is where all your abilities come from. You earn license points from battling, and you can spend them to unlock new abilities and gain access to 2 points per character. The game's story was absolutely breathtaking and unique for a Final Fantasy game. The world building was done incredibly well and allows for the political focus of the game story to prosper. The presentation of the game is groundbreaking and ahead of its time. The art style aged beautifully, and the CGI cutscenes made the game feel like a movie. The voice acting was godly, even for a game today, let alone a game in 2006. At number 4, I have Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Initially, my only exposure to Xenoblade was through Shulk's inclusion in Smash. Shulk's portrayal in Smash made him seem like a pretty lighthearted character, and after actually playing Xenoblade, all my preconceived notions about Shulk and Xenoblade as a whole got absolutely shattered by the story of Xenoblade. Shulk is an incredible protagonist, and the raw emotion that his voice actor was able to bring out as Shulk during the game's amazing cutscenes shocked me. Xenoblade has one of the greatest JRPG stories of all time, full of crazy twists and emotional moments. It's so great that even if you don't own a Switch or a copy of the game, I highly recommend anybody to go sit down and watch the cutscenes of that game on YouTube, because it's a story worth seeing. The story alone warrants a placement on this list, but the game's battle system is incredible and offers up some really satisfying gameplay. The UI improvements to the game in the Definitive Edition makes the game so much easier to understand than the previous UI, and the open world and environments look amazing in this game and are incredibly fun to explore. The game's visuals are held back by the hardware limitations of the consoles that the game has been released on, the Switch, Wii, and 3DS, but the game's visuals are still amazing in spite of it. The character models and animations have been reworked to better align with the sequels, even changing the whole game engine to match Xenoblade 2. I could go on all day about this game, but you guys just need to play it for yourselves. At number 3, I have Resident Evil 4. RE4 is one of the greatest games ever. The game went through one of the worst development cycles of any game, going through 4 scrapped versions, one of them even becoming Devil May Cry 1, spawning its own subgenre of action games. Capcom went through hell to create RE4, and it was 100% worth it. This game is an absolute masterpiece. RE4's plot is simple and effective. It sees Leon Kennedy on a mission in Spain to rescue the president's kidnapped daughter, later uncovering a plot by the Los Illuminados to use the Las Plagas parasite as a bioweapon to take over the world. It's a pretty simple rescue mission, but there are multiple twists with the characters like Luis, Ada, and Krauser, which prevent the story from getting stale. The game also handles its tone really well. The game doesn't take itself too seriously, giving Leon the opportunity to drop one of his iconic one-liners. The game also knows when to be serious and when to be comedic. These scenes offer up a nice breather for the player because the game's campaign is really tense at times because there could be a Ganado lurking at every corner. The game's combat is easily the best thing about the game though. It is incredibly fun to explore the areas while taking out hordes of enemies all at once. The game provides you limited resources like ammo and healing items, which forces you to think through every encounter in the game. This makes the player think up efficient ways to take out enemies rather than mindlessly shooting around, and the game gives you multiple alternatives for killing, such as melee combat. One solid strategy is to shoot a Ganado, stunning it and kicking it down and knifing it to death, allowing you to go through many encounters without wasting ammo. And that's one way to deal with them. Overall, the game is a classic and a must play for anybody watching this video who hasn't played RE4. At number 2, I have Metroid Dread. My history with Metroid doesn't run that deep. A few years ago I played through Super Metroid and I loved it, but I never got the opportunity to play the other Metroid games. Metroid Dread was the perfect opportunity for me to play a Metroid game and fall in love with the franchise like I always wanted to, and Metroid Dread 100% delivered. While I haven't played too many Metroid games, I played a few Metroidvanias, the subgenre that was inspired by Super Metroid and Castlevania The Symphony of the Night, so I wasn't completely unfamiliar with the genre or the series. Metroid Dread offers up some of the tightest controls I've ever felt in a side-scroller. Samus is incredibly responsive and the physics are amazing in this game. In Metroidvanias, you progress through by unlocking upgrades which grant access to previously closed off areas. Dread provides a steady stream of upgrades at the right pace, never really feeling like you're getting them too early or too late. As Samus is improving, you're improving with her as a player. I felt myself gaining a better grasp on the mechanics. The game is designed around these upgrades incredibly well, and each roadblock that was required a power-up that I didn't have was incredibly memorable, and because of that I was able to remember things I've seen days prior to getting the upgrades in the game. When the game's upgrades are obtained, the game does a really good job of teaching how to use them by giving you safe places to try them out, usually requiring you to use them to get out of the room you're in. The game gives you multiple opportunities to use them and get accustomed to your new abilities, and throws a boss your way to further test your skills with the current upgrades. But Dread's bosses are designed perfectly, giving you a difficult challenge that never feels unfair, and always makes you a better player after the fight, by giving you a new insight on how mechanics can be used and by forcing you to improve your execution. The game also has another important enemy known as the Emi. They are the robots that are sent to the planet before Samus and are being controlled by the main antagonist Ravenbeak and attempt to capture Samus on sight. They patrol certain areas of the map known as the Emi Zones. These areas are designed to put them at an advantage, while putting you in a position where you have to desperately try to escape their grasp, because it's impossible for Samus to defeat them on her own. She needs to traverse the Emi Zone and find the Omega Cannon, a temporary upgrade that gives Samus the chance to take them down. But until you get that, you have to use everything in your arsenal to avoid them, because they can take you out in one hit. Each enemy comes with their own abilities that make escaping each one harder than the last, and really feels like an uphill battle. Metroid Dread is one of the best games I've played in a long time, and all of you need to play this game really soon. And now for my honorable mentions. Even though these games didn't make the list, they are all great games in their own right, and I'd recommend them for anyone interested in trying. My honorable mentions are Trials of Mana, Ni no Kuni, Under Night in Birth, BlazBlue Central Fiction, and Guilty Gear XX Accent Core Plus R. With that out of the way, let's get on to my number 1 game of the year. In recent memory, there haven't been that many games that had me absolutely hyped for their release. I usually get a little excited, watch a few trailers, and then wait for the release without putting too much thought into it. But Monster Hunter Rise was a huge exception. There was a time where every single day I'd watch the Weapon and Monster trailers because I was so hyped for the game. I watched an endless amount of content and played hours of Monster Hunter Generation just to help me get through the wait for Monster Hunter Rise, and I'm so happy with the game that I waited all this time for. This game was my most anticipated game of the year, and it isn't even close. Monster Hunter Rise was the best game released in 2021, and the best game I played in 2021. The game was so incredibly beautiful, from the locales and the monster designs. The character designs were amazing, and the music was perfect. Monster Hunter has been a series that I could play when I just wanted an escape. The series has the ability to suck me in for hours while I hunt these amazing monsters, and while I completely zone out everything around me, all I see is my character dancing with the monster in front of me, carefully weaving around each attack, looking for openings. Rise gave me a feeling only a small list of games are capable of, and months after the release, this game still hasn't stopped making me feel this way. Because the game was designed that incredibly well, the game innovated heavily on Monster Hunter formula, making it a new experience for everyone playing it, even the Monster Hunter veterans. The game's movement has been made 1,000 times better with the addition of paladins and wirebugs. The Ademic Life gives you a reason to roam around before engaging a monster, giving you buffs for finding it. The base camp allows you full access to your inventory so you can change your items and equipment mid-hunt. The armor sets that you can create after hunting monsters look amazing, and the crossover hunts are incredibly fun and give you some great rewards. The multiplayer makes Monster Hunter a great game to call your friends up and complete hunts together. I can go on forever about this game, but all I need to say now is just play it. The game is on Switch right now and is releasing a PC port really soon, which looks really beautiful. And if you play on Xbox and PlayStation, it's unfortunate you can't play this game specifically, but you can still go back to play games like Monster Hunter World. This is a very good franchise and something that's worth playing for everyone. Now that concludes my first top 10 video on the channel. I hope all of you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed making it. Thank you for making it this far, and I hope you guys stick around for my upcoming videos on the channel. I want to get better with each video, so if you have any feedback you'd like to give me, please let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.